the forbidden world of the Imperial Harem. The Imperial Harem has always been shrouded in mystery, secrecy, and fascination. Known as the private quarters of the emperor or sultan, the harem was a symbol of wealth, power, and exclusivity. In various empires across the world, including the Ottoman Empire, the Chinese imperial court, and the Mughal Empire, the harem was not just a place for concubines, but a complex hierarchical institution with its own rules, codes, and secrets. Within this secluded world, certain bedroom rules governed the relationships between the emperor and his many wives, concubines, and female attendants. These rules were as strange as they were fascinating, often designed to maintain control, ensure loyalty, and protect the royal bloodline. In the Ottoman Empire, the most famous and notorious harem was that of the sultans. This sacred, often highly guarded space contained the most important women in the empire, the sultan's wives, concubines, and the women of the royal family. Yet, the harem wasn't simply about intimate relations. The harem was a place where power struggles, manipulation, and fierce competition played out. It was also a breeding ground for intrigue and political maneuvering, as the women in the harem sought favor with the sultan, hoping to bear him a son who would one day rule the empire. The first rule in most harems was simple but incredibly strict. No one outside the harem was allowed to enter. This wasn't just to preserve the privacy of the sultan, but also to maintain control over the women inside. Once women entered the harem, they were bound by a complex set of rules that restricted their freedom. They were typically chosen for their beauty, grace, and social standing, and their entry into the harem was often part of a political arrangement. The sultan had ultimate power over the harem, and it was his decision whether or not any woman in the harem could leave. Once a woman entered the harem, she was not allowed to freely leave or interact with the outside world. Among the strangest rules within the harem were those that governed sexual relations. The sultan had many concubines, but the women were expected to remain in their designated quarters unless summoned by him. The concept of being chosen was central to the relationship between the sultan and his concubines. The women were not allowed to approach him without his invitation, and their interactions with him were often highly formalized. In many cases, the sultan would have private chambers where he would select his chosen companion for the night, and only after specific rituals or approval would the women be allowed to spend time with him. Even the act of being summoned was often seen as an honor, as it could bring the woman closer to the sultan's favor. But the power dynamics weren't just about sex. There were strict rules about how women in the harem behaved and interacted with each other. The harem was a hierarchical space, with the sultan's wives at the top and the concubines beneath them. Women in the harem had to navigate the complex social system, which often involved rivalry and jealousy. The most prized women were the ones who gave birth to the sultan's sons, as these children were seen as heirs to the throne. The competition to bear a son was fierce, with women using all manner of strategies to win favor with the sultan. Why were these strict bedroom rules in the imperial harem necessary, and what impact did they have on the lives of the women involved? What do you think? Were these rules created to maintain order and power, or were they part of a system that took away the agency of the women in the harem? Share your thoughts in the comments. The women of the harem, their roles and struggles. While the emperor or sultan held supreme authority over the harem, the women who lived within it played a variety of roles, each with its own set of rules and expectations. The women of the imperial harem were not just mere objects of desire. They were strategic players in a complex political system. Their position within the harem determined their influence, access to power, and potential to bear heirs. Despite their confined roles, many of these women had significant influence on the empire's inner workings, often shaping the political landscape behind the scenes. The highest-ranking women in the harem were the sultan's wives, particularly the one known as the queen consort, or first wife. This woman held the most power, enjoying the sultan's favor and playing a central role in the day-to-day operations of the harem. As the mother of potential heirs, the queen consort had the responsibility of managing the sultan's children and overseeing the harem's other women. Her position often came with the highest privileges, such as being able to approach the sultan more freely and influence his decisions. She was also responsible for maintaining the harem's internal hierarchy, ensuring that the rules and regulations were followed by the concubines. Below the queen consort were the concubines. These women, while often of high birth or beauty, held a lesser status than the wives and were primarily valued for their potential to bear the sultan's children. Though concubines could not have the same influence as the sultan's wives, they were still highly prized, and some could rise in rank through favor. Their lives were often marked by intense competition, not only with one another, but also with the wives of the sultan. The arrival of a new concubine was often viewed as a fresh challenge to those already in the harem, leading to jealousy and rivalry. The women of the harem were kept under strict surveillance, and their movements were highly restricted. They were expected to remain inside the harem with few exceptions. However, while their physical freedom was limited, they still found ways to wield power. Some concubines formed strong relationships with the sultan, rising from obscurity to positions of political influence. For example, Roxolana, one of the most famous concubines of the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, managed to secure a position of unprecedented power after bearing him a son. Her rise to prominence was facilitated not just by her beauty, but by her intelligence, charm, and political acumen. Many women in the harem used their positions to their advantage, creating alliances with the sultan's wives or other concubines. These women often acted as spies, gossiping and using the information they gathered to maneuver within the harem's political web. Despite their limited outward power, these women were crucial players in the complex social and political world of the harem. However, the lives of these women were far from glamorous. Many women were essentially imprisoned, with no access to the outside world. Though some were treated lavishly, the majority lived in strict confinement, with little to no freedom. Their primary purpose was to bear children, often sons, who could secure the future of the sultan's dynasty. The pressure to produce heirs created an intense environment of rivalry, where failure to do so could lead to punishment or abandonment. How did the women in the imperial harem navigate their restricted roles and use their influence to gain power? Were their lives truly as passive as they appeared, or were they secretly shaping the empire from within? What do you think? Did the women of the harem have any agency in their roles, or were they completely controlled by the men who ruled over them? Share your thoughts in the comments. The bedroom rules, rituals, and restrictions. Within the imperial harem, the rules surrounding intimacy were governed by strict codes of behavior that were designed to maintain order, preserve the sanctity of the royal bloodline, and ensure the emperor or sultan's power remained unchallenged. These rules were not only about controlling the women's access to their ruler, but also about ensuring that the emperor's children were legitimate and that the women of the harem were kept in check. One of the most important rules in many harems, especially in the Ottoman Empire, was that women could not approach the emperor or sultan without being summoned. This concept of being chosen was a key part of the harem's dynamic. It wasn't about love or affection, it was about power, status, and influence. The sultan, for instance, would often have a special room where he would hold private sessions with his chosen companion for the night. The woman's status and beauty would play a significant role in whether or not she was summoned, but it was also about politics. Those who were summoned were given an opportunity to win the sultan's favor, potentially leading to a higher rank in the harem, or even the chance to bear him an heir. But even these private meetings were highly structured and formalized. There was an unspoken rule that a woman's interaction with the sultan had to be seen as part of her service to the imperial family. Emotions were considered irrelevant in these situations. The emperor or sultan's personal desires often came second to the political implications of who he chose. For women who were in the running to become the mother of the next ruler, pleasing the sultan was a matter of survival. The competition to gain his favor could be fierce and often led to underhanded tactics, including manipulation and scheming between the women of the harem. Another key aspect of the bedroom rules was the concept of being gifted. Women who were deemed especially beautiful or desirable could be given to high-ranking men in the empire, who would treat them as their own personal concubines. These women were still technically part of the harem and could be called back at any time by the emperor. This practice further reinforced the hierarchy within the harem, where women of higher rank could influence the empire, but those at the bottom of the hierarchy were used and discarded with little care. In many harems, strict rules also governed how women were to conduct themselves when the sultan or emperor was not present. They were expected to remain in their quarters, rarely leaving or interacting with others unless given permission. Their behavior was tightly monitored by eunuchs and other trusted attendants, who ensured that no one disrupted the order of the harem. The women, while often treated lavishly, lived in confinement, and their interactions with men were carefully controlled to prevent any potential scandal or threat to the royal bloodline. The men who had access to the harem were also bound by their own set of rules. These men, usually eunuchs, were trusted to manage the day-to-day operations of the harem and ensured that the women remained in line. Eunuchs were often chosen for their loyalty, as they had no family to compete with the harem for power. While their roles were significant, they were often also seen as enforcers, making sure the women adhered to the rigid social expectations of the harem. How did the strict bedroom rules in the Imperial Harem impact the lives of women? Were these rules a reflection of the empire's need for control, or were they rooted in a deeper fear of instability and rebellion? What do you think? Were these rules primarily about maintaining political order, or did they stem from the need to control the women's autonomy? Share your thoughts in the comments. The darker side of the harem: power struggles and tragedies. While the Imperial Harem may have seemed like a place of opulence and indulgence, it was often a breeding ground for power struggles, manipulation, and tragedies. Despite the luxurious surroundings, the women in the harem were constantly navigating a complex web of competition, deceit, and betrayal. These struggles were not just about who could bear the ruler's children. They were about control, survival, and the pursuit of power within an unforgiving, highly structured environment. One of the most tragic aspects of the Imperial Harem was the violent rivalry that often broke out between the women. Because the highest-ranking women were often the ones who produced heirs, the competition to bear a son for the sultan or emperor was fierce. As a result, women would use any means necessary to gain favor, whether it was through seduction, manipulation, or even espionage. The internal politics of the harem could be deadly, with women resorting to poison, blackmail, and even assassination to eliminate their rivals. In the Ottoman Empire, for example, one of the most infamous power struggles took place between the mother of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, Valide Sultan, and his favorite wife, Hurrem Sultan Roxolana. Hurrem, originally a slave, used her charm, intelligence, and ruthlessness to secure Suleiman's affections and eventually become his only wife. Her political ambition drove her to eliminate rivals, including her own daughter-in-law, and gain unprecedented power within the court. Her rise to power led to a shift in the balance of power within the Ottoman harem and court, as she essentially replaced the position of the Valide Sultan, the mother of the sultan, who traditionally held significant influence. However, not all women who navigated these treacherous waters succeeded. For some, their rivalry with other women in the harem would lead to their eventual demise. The most tragic fate often befell those who were discarded by the emperor or sultan once they had lost favor. These women, once adored for their beauty or position, could be thrown aside without mercy, abandoned to live in relative obscurity, or even executed in the harshest of circumstances. The lives of these women were often shaped entirely by the whims of their ruler, and their fates were determined not by their own choices, but by the political machinations of the court. Another dark side of the harem was the emotional toll it took on the women. While many of them came from noble families or were brought into the harem as part of diplomatic alliances, they were still bound by rules that stripped away their freedom and autonomy. Though they lived in luxurious quarters, they were essentially prisoners, unable to leave the harem or form meaningful relationships with the outside world. The emotional isolation was often compounded by the mental strain of knowing that their worth was determined by their ability to bear children for the emperor or sultan. For those who failed to do so, the consequences could be dire. Some were cast aside, others were punished, and some even met untimely deaths. Despite the trauma and rivalry that plagued the Imperial Harem, it also served as a place of incredible influence for some women. Those who succeeded in bearing sons and gaining favor with their rulers could hold great power, wielding influence over the emperor or sultan's decisions and policies. Some women even rose to positions of considerable political power, becoming advisors to the throne and engaging in affairs of state. However, this power came at a great personal cost, and the constant fear of betrayal, manipulation, and political scheming made the harem a place of both luxury and treachery. What role did manipulation and rivalry play in the lives of the women in the harem? Were their power struggles an inevitable consequence of the rigid hierarchy, or were they a reflection of deeper societal issues? What do you think? Were the women of the harem empowered by their position, or were they trapped in a cycle of powerlessness and manipulation? Share your thoughts in the comments.